September 3rd, 1260. A Mamluk general digs his heels into his horse's flanks and charges toward the valley. Behind him, thousands of horsemen wait hidden on the slopes. Ahead of him, the most lethal army the world had ever seen. This man's name is Baybars, and what he's about to do has never been done before. The Mongol Empire had conquered more territory in less time than any force in human history. In half a century, they swept from China to Poland. 14 million square kilometers subdued in 50 years. They destroyed entire civilizations, wiped cities off the map. In 1258, they killed the Caliph of Baghdad, the spiritual and political leader of the entire Islamic world, and destroyed the largest library of the medieval world. 2 years later, they were at Egypt's doorstep. Everyone assumed the pattern would repeat, that Egypt would be next, that there was nothing any army could do. But that's not what happened, and the reason why is one of the most fascinating, underrated stories of the Middle Ages. See, the weapon that defeated the Mongols wasn't a catapult, wasn't new technology, wasn't even a bigger army. So what was it? That's what this video is going to show you. This is the story of ANNIHILATED, and I can promise you it's not the story you think you know. First, you need to understand what the Mamluks were facing, because if you don't get why the Mongols seemed unbeatable, the Battle of ANNIHILATED won't make sense. The Mongol army didn't win on numbers alone. Brutality was part of it, calculated, deliberate, but that's not what made them truly terrifying. What set them apart was a military system that worked on a level most armies didn't even understand. The psychological one. Genghis Khan, who unified the Mongol tribes in 1206, grasped something few generals ever have. Fear amplifies your power. An army that breaks the enemy's will before the first clash starts has already won. He cultivated that reputation deliberately, using brutality as communication, not just destruction. Every massacre was a message. Every razed city was a statement broadcast to every other city that hadn't yet seen Mongol riders on the horizon. The secret was reputation, terror. The hours, days, weeks the enemy spent imagining what was coming before they even saw Mongol riders on the horizon. That anticipation, that paralysis where armies just froze, that was the Mongols' real weapon. How did they do it? With speed, with intelligence, and with a reputation meticulously built over decades. Mongol cavalry moved at speeds that defied medieval logic. 60 to 75 miles a day too, 3 times more than European or Islamic armies could manage. Not just faster horses, better logistics. Mongol warriors rode with herds of spares, sometimes 5 horses per man, switching between them to maintain pace. They drank mare's milk, ate dried food, slept in the saddle. A Mongol army on the move wasn't just an army, it was a force of nature that showed up before you could even organize a defense. But speed was only the beginning. The Mongols had intelligence networks that showed up months before their armies. Spies, merchants, diplomats, everything fed them information. Before they attacked a region, they already knew the supply routes, which leaders could be bought, where the political fractures ran deep. When the Mongols arrived, they weren't surprised. The enemy was. And then there was the reputation. The Mongols learned fast. Cities that resisted got destroyed. No exceptions. Samarkand resisted in 1220, razed. Baghdad resisted in 1258, massacred. But cities that surrendered peacefully, they got mercy. Artisans were spared. Specialists were relocated. People went on living under Mongol rule. The message was clear. Resist and you're gone. Surrender and you survive. That cruelty wasn't random. It was calculated policy. The Mongols understood the math. Destroying a resistant city cost enormous time and resources, but the propaganda value was worth it. One public execution turned a city into a warning broadcast across 1,000 miles. And it worked. Cities with massive walls and huge populations opened their gates the moment Mongol riders appeared on the horizon. Not cowardice. The math didn't add up. The Georgians tried fighting back. The Khwarezmians tried. The Poles, the Hungarians. Same result every time, so why risk it? Here's what most people get wrong about the Mongols. They weren't just nomadic warriors. That's the stereotype, and it's totally wrong. Faced with fortified cities, they hired siege engineers, Chinese, Persian, Arab and learned siege warfare. Rivers in the way? They built bridges or found fords. Needed naval fleets? Built them. Unknown terrain? Sent scouts and figured it out. The army that reached the Middle East in 1257-1258 wasn't a horde of barbarians. It was a professional military machine. Elite cavalry, specialist siege engineers who'd raised the world's strongest walls, communication lines spanning an empire, logistics unmatched in medieval warfare. A military organization that learned and adapted after every campaign. Every conquered people became part of the machine for conquering the next. In half a century, 1206 to 1260, the Mongols destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, invaded China, Persia, Russia, Poland, Hungary, and parts of the Middle East. They smashed European cavalry on the Polish plains, pushed into Austria and Italy before withdrawing for internal reasons. Toppled Islamic caliphates, Chinese dynasties, Persian empires, conquered steppes, deserts, forests, mountains, terrain other armies treated as barriers. The Mongols just crossed it. By 1260, no army on the planet had beaten the Mongols in an open field. Period. Then, February 1258 happened. And what their system could actually do, not in theory, not in reputation, but in flesh and stone, got written into history. February 1258. Baghdad. Picture it. For 500 years, this was the Islamic world's center. Not just politically, the Abbasid Caliph lived here, spiritual leader of tens of millions from Morocco to Indonesia. But intellectually too. The House of Wisdom was the greatest center of learning in the medieval world. Mathematicians, astronomers, philosophers, physicians, the intellectual elite of East and West. The library held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, texts from ancient Greece, original Arabic works, Persian translations, scientific discoveries that nowhere else had preserved. Baghdad was, in every meaningful sense, the heart of a civilization. Hulagu Khan, Genghis's grandson, arrived with an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 men, though numbers vary. He sent ultimatums. Surrender completely. Caliph al-Mustasim refused. There was logic to it. Accepting meant admitting Mongol rule over the caliphate, which would destroy his religious authority. Plus, Baghdad had survived sieges before. Solid walls, resources, Muslim allies who could come help. They never came. 13 days. That's how long the siege lasted. When the walls fell, what followed was one of history's most complete destructions. Contemporary estimates, 800,000 dead. Probably exaggerated by Islamic writers, but it tells you the scale. Caliph al-Mustasim was captured. Some sources say he was rolled in carpets and trampled by horses. The Mongols didn't spill royal blood directly. Others say he was locked in his own treasury and starved. Historians debate the exact method. They don't debate that he died. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had existed for 5 centuries, ended at that moment. Then they threw the House of Wisdom's books into the Tigris. A chronicler wrote that the water ran black with ink for days. Think about what that meant. The Caliph, dead. The library, destroyed. The spiritual, political, and intellectual center of a civilization gone in 2 weeks. Now think about what that meant for every Muslim ruler alive in 1260. The Caliph, the man representing Islam's continuity since the 7th century, the Prophet's successor, was dead. The city that preserved ancient knowledge, that produced Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina lay in ashes. And the Mongols were already moving again. The Mongols didn't stop. January 1260. Aleppo fell. Brutal sack looted for days, walls destroyed, population decimated. February 1260. Damascus surrendered without fighting. The governor left the city to negotiate before any siege even started. One of the Middle East's oldest, grandest cities just opened its gates, because the alternative was Baghdad. The pattern was complete. The advance was relentless. Baghdad, Aleppo, Damascus. Next, the Mongols looked south toward Palestine and beyond it, Egypt. Egypt was the last independent Muslim power left. If it fell, the question of an Islamic Middle East was finished. No caliphate left to reclaim, no symbolic capital to liberate. just the end of 600 years of political and cultural continuity. The geopolitics made it worse. The Crusader states Acre, Antioch, remnants of European crusades sat on coastal territory between the Mongols and Egypt. And here's the wrinkle. Some Mongol leaders, including Kitbuka Noyan the general, who'd command at Ain-Jalut, were Nestorian Christians. Hulagu Khan had Christian wives and favored Christian communities. There was correspondence between Mongols and European powers, rumors of an alliance against Islam East and Christian West, joining forces to crush the Muslim world between them. That alliance never came together. The Crusaders, pragmatic and hardened from decades in the region, made their calculation: stay neutral. No active support for the Mongols, no fighting the Mamluks. But they did something that mattered. They let Mamluk forces pass through their territory unopposed and cut off Mongol access to ports and coastal supply lines. Neutrality that, in practice, favored Egypt. On the Mamluk side, one fact allowed no debate. Nobody else would do this. No other power. No army to call, no ally to turn to. If Egypt didn't fight, the pattern repeated itself. And if Egypt lost, it lost forever. Hulagu sent envoys to Cairo with a letter for Sultan Qutuz. Psychological intimidation, a list of Mongol conquests, descriptions of what happened to cities that resisted. Then the message: you're already defeated. Just choose surrender or massacre. Qutuz seized the envoys and executed them. Public. Their heads hung on Cairo's gates. That wasn't emotion. That was strategy. And to understand why, you need to understand what the Mamluks were. You probably expect this to be about numbers. Strategy. The Mongol army's temporary weakness. The real answer is stranger, and it starts with one word. Mamluk comes from Arabic mamluk, which literally means possessed, property of. A slave. The Mamluks were slave soldiers. Boys, usually Turkic from Central Asian steppes, Kipchaks, Cumans, or Circassians from the Caucasus bought in slave markets and sold to Islamic rulers in Egypt and Syria. This started in the 9th century, but this wasn't slavery the way the West imagines it. Mamluk boys were bought young 8, 10, 12 years old and placed in military barracks called ribat, training intensity unlike anything else at the time. Horsemanship, archery, spear work, battle strategy, physical conditioning, years of it before they were considered warriors. This is crucial. They trained for this and nothing else. No farming, no commerce, no tribal or family ties to divide their loyalty. Their entire identity was military. The regiment was their only reference group. This created warriors with unique qualities. First, technical skill. Few armies could match. Decades of intensive specialized training from childhood. A Mamluk cavalryman spent more time practicing war than any European knight, any Muslim soldier, any feudal nobleman. That's all they did. Second, extraordinary group cohesion. They grew up together, trained together, slept together since childhood. Their loyalty was horizontal, to regiment brothers, not vertical to kings or nobles. No homeland to defend, no family waiting, just the regiment. Third, a military ethos that honored martial excellence and warrior honor above birth, wealth, or connections. This system produced one specific thing: soldiers who fought because they were soldiers, period. No other choice. But there was something else that separated them from almost every army the Mongols faced. They were from the steppes. Most Kipchak Mamluks were born on the same Central Asian grasslands as the Mongols, grew up on horseback like them, learned to shoot mounted like them, grew up with steppe warfare, logic, mobility, speed, psychological pressure, retreat as tactic not weakness absorbed into them from before they could write. They knew steppe cavalry tactics not from manuals, but as instinctive, embodied knowledge. They understood war like the Mongols did because they were from the same world. Same air, same horses, same battle stories. The difference, they fought for the other side. And they knew every move. When the Mongols executed the feigned retreat, cavalry pretends to pull back to draw the enemy into ambush. Most medieval armies took the bait because they didn't recognize the pattern. The Mamluks did. They used the same tactic themselves. Think about what that means tactically. A European army saw cavalry pulling back and thought weakness or panic. because that's how European cavalry withdrew when losing. The Mamluks saw the same withdrawal and recognized it as the pattern they themselves used. They knew the pursuit was the trap, not the opening. In 1250, 10 years before Ain Jalut, the Mamluks defeated King Louis IX of France's crusade, captured the king, and took control of Egypt from the Ayyubids, not political amateurs, warriors who became rulers through combat merit alone. Qutuz became sultan in 1259, partly because of the Mongol threat. He overthrew his predecessor, claiming a war leader was needed for what was coming. He was a skilled administrator, capable politician, competent warrior. But the general who'd actually lead the battle was Baybars. Baybars was Kipchak-born on Central Asian steppes, sold into slavery as a child, possibly during the very Mongol campaigns that destroyed the Kipchak tribes, trained in the Mamluk system, and risen through decades of warfare to become one of the Muslim world's most brilliant commanders. Fought crusaders, fought Ayyubids, was at the battle that captured Louis IX in 1250. A man who'd lived his entire life at war, learning from every loss and every win. Relentless, strategically creative, understood Mongol warfare from the inside. Because Mongol warfare was, fundamentally, the steppe warfare he'd absorbed since childhood. When Hulagu sent messengers to Cairo with a letter of intimidation, Baybars and Qutuz decided what happened to them. Executing messengers was a violation of medieval, and especially Mongol code. It meant no more negotiation, no going back. We're at war. Explicit. By killing Hulagu's messengers, Qutuz and Baybars sent 3 messages simultaneously. First, to the Islamic world, we're not backing down. Second, to their own troops, there's no exit, so fight to win. Third, to the Mongols, we're not afraid of you. Military psychology applied with precision, the kind of thinking that separated them from every other army that tried resistance and failed. The Mamluks didn't know this when they marched north. Munka Khan, the Great Khan, died in 1259. His death triggered a succession crisis that split the empire. 2 brothers Kublai and Arik Boka were fighting for the throne. Hulagu Khan, commanding the Middle East campaign, allied with Kublai. To strengthen his position in that dynastic fight, Hulagu needed to be at the empire's center, not fighting in the Levant. So he did something that changed Ain Jalut. He withdrew most of his army to Iran. Kitbuka Noyan's force at Ain Jalut wasn't the full army that destroyed Baghdad and swept Syria in weeks. Around 10,000 to 12,000 warriors veterans, extraordinarily competent, but a fraction of what the Mongol Empire could field. The Mamluks didn't know that. They marched thinking they faced the full Mongol force, the same army that destroyed Baghdad, swept Syria in weeks. They marched anyway. And here's what matters. Kitbuka kept advancing with this smaller force, capturing Aleppo, receiving Damascus's surrender, moving south. Nobody tried to stop him. Why would the Mamluks be any different? The answer wasn't in raw numbers. The Mamluk force was roughly 10,000 to 20,000 soldiers, comparable to Kitbuka's contingent, not overwhelmingly superior. The difference was elsewhere. Identity, training, understanding. The Crusaders also did the math. Acre, their main stronghold, technically sat on any Mongol route to Egypt. They made a pragmatic decision. No alliance with the Mongols, no attack on them either. Let Mamluk forces pass through unimpeded a neutrality that, in practice, enabled the battle that was coming. The stage was set. Everything you learned about the Mamluk steppe origins, childhood training, innate cavalry knowledge, the psychology of men with no exit, would now play out in a single valley on an afternoon in September. The valley of Ain Jalut, Arabic for Goliath Spring, where David beat Goliath, according to scripture. The historic irony wasn't lost. Located in what is now northern Israel, in the Jezreel Valley, it's a specific kind of terrain, gentle hills flanking a central valley that naturally funnels troop movement, enough slope cover to hide cavalry formations, enough valley floor to maneuver, but not so open that a lateral ambush couldn't work. Terrain that made numbers irrelevant. Position was everything. Qutuz chose Ain Jalut deliberately. This wasn't chance. This was a geographic trap, deliberately selected to turn the terrain itself into a weapon, to use the land against the army that conquered from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. The plan was simple to understand, devastating in execution. Baybars would advance with a small vanguard visible, aggressive enough to look like the main force to make contact with Kitbuka's troops. Baybars wasn't trying to win that first engagement. He was trying to lure. Kutuz's main army stayed hidden on the slopes, waiting, silent, invisible from the valley floor. September 3rd, 1260. Baybars and his vanguard advance. They make contact with Kitbuka's forces, arrows, lances, cavalry on cavalry. Then, as if pushed back, barely holding formation, they withdraw. The feigned retreat. It was Mongol signature, used against European armies on Polish plains, against Chinese armies across Manchuria, against Islamic armies in Persia and Iraq. Pretend to retreat, draw enemies out, stretch their lines, then turn and strike when they're spread out, confident, chasing. Every cavalry force hitting it for the first time made the same mistake. When enemies fall back, you press the advantage. The pursuit feels right. But this time, it was Baybars retreating. And at the end of that withdrawal, there was no empty space. There was Kutuz's entire army. Kitbuka advanced. The logic was solid. It had worked through 10 campaigns. His warriors had seen armies break before. The retreat confirmed the pattern Mongols knew by heart. Enemy yields, you press, you win. Kitbuka was a veteran part of the campaigns that destroyed Baghdad, swept Syria, not naive, experienced, and experience said, when the enemy retreats, advance. The Mongol army followed Baybars into the valley, then Kutuz's army emerged from the slopes, both flanks, simultaneously, like a trap snapping shut. What happened next was intense and prolonged. Not an instant rout. Sources describe hours of battle with real crises for the Mamluks. Kitbuka was competent, and his warriors were veterans hardened by decades of war. They knew how to react when surrounded, knew how to break through, find weakness, reorganize on the fly. Ain Jalut wasn't a one-sided massacre. The Mamluk right wing cracked under Mongol pressure, not a withdrawal, actual disintegration. The formation started coming apart, and with it, the ambush was becoming a defeat. That's when Kutuz did something Islamic chroniclers recorded and modern historians still cite. Threw off his helmet, shouted, "Wa Islama," for Islam, and charged alone into the fight, at the front, dragging his men with him. Not a general barking orders from a safe spot. A warrior refusing to lose with his own body. The terrain and ambush put the Mongols in a bind they couldn't escape. Valley with Mamluks on both slopes and one blocking the exit. Their decisive advantage, speed and mobility, reposition quickly, attack in waves, withdraw and strike was neutralized by the terrain. The Mongol right wing collapsed first. When cavalry formations break in terrain like that, collapse is swift and catastrophic. Panic spreads. An advancing army with confidence became scattered pieces trying to escape. Kitbuka died in the battle, exactly how and when historians debate. Some say he died fighting, still trying to reorganize the lines. Others say he was captured and executed after the defeat was final. What's certain, he didn't survive Ain Jalut. The general who marched into Damascus 2 weeks earlier never came back north. General dead and formation destroyed, Kitbuka's army stopped existing as a force. Survivors scattered. Mamluk pursuit killed or captured what remained. For the first time in decades of unbroken conquest, the Mongol army lost an open field battle. Not repelled by walls or terrain, defeated in the open, army versus army. But the Ain Jalut victory wasn't the end. It was the start of one question. Would the defeat stick? Weeks after Ain Jalut, Kutuz was dead, assassinated by Baybars. Mamluk politics were brutal. Baybars expected a reward for Ain Jalut, the governorship of Aleppo. Kutuz said no. Reasons are debated. Maybe Kutuz feared Baybars getting too powerful. Maybe there were personal tensions the sources don't capture. Baybars organized a conspiracy, and during a hunting trip back to Cairo, Kutuz was killed. Baybars became Sultan of Egypt. The man who executed the tactical plan that saved Egypt now had the power to make that victory last. And that's where it gets truly extraordinary, because Baybars didn't just win a battle. He knew a battle win without defensive structure is just a delay before the next invasion. He built a system. Baybars ruled 1260–1277, and every year he worked to make sure Ain Jalut would never unravel. Not as an endpoint, but as a first line of defense, something that needed permanent infrastructure to sustain. First, intelligence networks. The Mongols excelled at intelligence, key to their success. Baybars built something to match, a network of messengers, spies, and informants across the Middle East. Rider stations, the Barid could relay messages from Cairo to Damascus in under a day. He knew about Mongol movements before they were any immediate threat, which gave him what the Mongols always took from enemies: time to react. Second, fortified frontiers. Baybars invested heavily in building and strengthening defensive positions along Mamluk borders. Not isolated castles, but a network of forts, garrisons, forward positions creating real defensive depth. Any Mongol invasion had to reduce them one by one, burning time, resources, lives, just to reach Egypt. Third, and this was his most brilliant move, diplomacy into the Mongol world itself. Hulagu's Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde were both Mongol, but at odds over territory and succession. Burqa Khan, ruling the Golden Horde north of the Caspian, converted to Islam and had serious disputes with Hulagu over the Caucasus. Baybars formed a formal alliance with Burqa. Correspondence, gifts, aligned goals. That meant any Ilkhanate attack on Egypt risked the Golden Horde attacking from the north two fronts, an enemy divided against itself. Baybars turned Mongol internal division into permanent strategic leverage. He didn't just win at Ain Jalut, he rewrote the geopolitical game. The Mongols repeatedly tried to retake the Levant. The Battle of Homs in 1260, right after Ain Jalut, ended in another Mongol defeat. The Second Battle of Homs in 1281 was also repelled. The Battle of Marj al-Safar in 1303, over 40 years after Ain Jalut, was still a Mamluk victory. Ain Jalut wasn't luck, not an anomaly. It was the first predictable result of a military system built, deliberately or accidentally, to perfectly counter the Mongol machine. Historians legitimately debate whether Ain Jalut was the turning point, or whether the succession crisis and conquest system limits would have stalled Mongol expansion eventually anyway. It's still an open question, but this is not debatable. In September 1260, a window opened: Hulagu's withdrawal, the Mongol succession crisis. Only one force on the planet was structurally positioned to exploit it. The Mamluks ruled Egypt and the Levant until 1517, when the Ottomans overthrew them. 257 years longer than many empires rooted in a battle nobody thought they could win. After 1517, they survived as a military caste in Egypt for 3 more centuries, until the Napoleonic Wars. So what was, in the end, the hidden weapon of 1260? Not terrain, though it mattered. Not the feigned retreat, though it was decisive. Not even the Mongol army's temporary weakness, though, that opened the door. It was the Mamluks' identity. Men born into the Mongol world, shaped by steppe warfare, cavalry mindset, combat logic. Torn from their origins and transformed through a training system military historians still study into something unique. Warriors who understood the enemy completely, yet fought for their adopted world with the ferocity of people with no escape. Baybars was a slave. Kutus was a slave. The generals commanding the wings at Ain Jalut were mostly former slaves. That origin far from a weakness made them possible. An army of local nobles would have hesitated facing the Mongol reputation. They'd rationalize retreat, find reasons to negotiate, seek an honorable exit. And nobles had honorable exits because they had lands to manage, families to protect, inheritances to preserve. Surrender wasn't the end. It was lineage survival. The Mamluks had no such options. No homeland to retreat to. Many were bought from families destroyed by Mongol invasions. No social status survived surrender. A Mamluk sultan who gave way without fighting lost the only thing that made him someone: his martial reputation. No dynasty to preserve, because the Mamluk system didn't pass power by blood. A Mamluk sultan's son didn't automatically inherit. Another, more capable warrior simply took it. Their identity was victory or death, nothing else. And then they won. Historian David Ayalon spent decades studying the Mamluks and argued their system was the first professional military civil service of the medieval world, men chosen for merit and ability, not birth or tribe. So what defeated the era's most professional army? Paradoxically, the only army that matched its professionalism demands. The next time someone says something's inevitable, a force unstoppable, a trend irreversible. The outcome decided before the battle. Remember, Ain Jalut. Remember, the army that destroyed Baghdad, swept across Persia, terrified Europe, never lost an open-field battle in 50 years of conquest. Entered a valley in Palestine and faced 15,000 former slaves who spent their lives learning exactly how to beat them. The most powerful weapon is rarely obvious, and those who seem destined to win don't always know what's waiting on the other side of the valley. If this story surprised you, tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest. Subscribe if you want to stay. The next story has a secret just as deeply buried. Until then,